In this video, I'm just going to casually demonstrate how to restyle an existing pattern and garment into a new design. I haven't planned this out, so this is going to be a little rough, but it's what you would probably be going through if you were experimenting yourself with some trial and error. I'm really going to be focusing just on this swing top with the modified raglan sleeve. The skirt was just here mainly for modesty. Before we get into making changes, let's take a closer look at the design. I want to raise her arms more into the T pose so that you can see what's going on here. There's two ways for me to go about that. I could either show the skeleton, the joints, click on this joint here, get the little gingerbread guy, which will link whatever I do here to the other side, so you can see here that I'll bring the arms up and down. The problem with that is, since I'm not in simulation mode, if I bring the arms up here and then simulate, then this opening of the sleeve and the sleeve itself will not be over the shoulders and the arm the way it should be. So that is a bad idea. If I do want to move the skeletal and still have the garment move with those movements that I'm doing, I would want to simulate. So I'm going to simulate now, which kind of turns on gravity, and now I'm going to get my Gizmo and gingerbread, and you see that I am moving the skeleton with it. Now you can see this garment is really oversized, and that could actually lend itself to a lot of different styling options. I could put seam line ends, I could lengthen it, I could add gathers to the top here, add a ruffle, I could reduce some of the fullness, do pleats or tucks. There's the back view there. Alright, so now that we have a good look at that, I'm wanting to bring her arms back down to a more natural A pose. Instead of doing the avatar joints, I'm just going to show you how to move the pose. Now I am using the new library feature for the assets. Yours might be over here in this panel. I'm going to go to avatar, female, and I'm using the default Mia avatar, so that's over here in the default folder. So now I'm just going to go to pose, and I'm just going to choose this A pose here, and I'll get the option to just change the pose only. And simulate, and it brings her back down. So it's quite a different look when she doesn't have her arms all stretched out. So in thinking about this and sharing it with you, I'm going to start out by slashing or separating a line somewhere here. If we wanted to have a transparent view, we can go to translucent, and so now I can see a little better where I'm going with this. And I have my pattern over here in the 2D window. At the moment it's a bit messy, which is not really a good workflow. So we're going to clean that up just a little bit for a visual. And here are the sleeves. And then I'm going to put the back pieces right next to it, and each band next to each of the sleeves. And again, this is a modified raglan. A true raglan would come from under the armpit area here. This is really just a style line, but it still kind of looks like a raglan. Alright, so with that little bit of cleanup, I'm going to tap, I have simulation turned on, and you can see these little blue dots just kind of stick there. And so if I wanted to have a seam here, I can just come right over here and see that I've got my little dot right there. Now I do want to be kind of in this area here, but you see the dot disappears. So what I might want to do instead is draw on the pattern. Now it goes right back to being a solid surface because it's assuming you want to see what you're drawing, but I don't want that. I really do want to see my translucent surface, because really I'm just wanting to make a little mark here so that I'm not relying on a dot that disappears. So now that I see that, I am going to measure from here to here, and there are measuring tools, but those seem to take a little longer than just a quick little temporary check that I want to do. So I just pretend that I'm going to be drawing a new pattern or a new internal line, and I'm just temporarily using that as a way to measure. So I'm coming up with 4.3 inches. So I'm going to do a 4-inch line that's offset from here. And just as another side note, I could have also used my linear measure tool and just kind of found out where that position was. But for me, that's not as straightforward sometimes as what I just demonstrated here. So let's stop using that tool. All right, now for the offset that I wanted to do. I am going to convert this to a curve point so that I have continuous access to this line. So I'm going to select the line, right click, offset as an internal line, and we're going to do those 4 inches. And we want it to extend all the way to the end and maintain that curve. We're going to click OK. And I need to do the same thing for the back. Right click. Oops, I wasn't selected there. Just as a side note, once you click on it, if you're right clicking and you're not leaving your mouse exactly right on it, you'll lose that option here. So offset as internal line, it remembers the last value that I put in, and we're going to say OK. Alright, so what's next? So let's say I decided that I do not want to have center front buttons. I just want this to be a butterflied piece right here. I need to get rid of the buttons and buttonholes, and to do that we're going to go to our Edit Button and Buttonhole tool here, and I'm going to hold down Shift and select each of these buttons and each of the buttonholes, and I'm going to simply press the delete key, and those are gone. Next, I'm going to delete these reference lines and markings, and now I want to slice, because this is actually the center front here. We just had this overlap for the buttons and buttonholes. So I'm going to right click on this. I'm just going to cut it. I'm not going to cut and sew. And I'm going to delete those pieces. And now I'm going to merge the center front. And all of that was by selecting the given lines using the handy right click feature. We'll come back and clean up here in just a moment, but let's take a look at what we have. And you see that I have that seam line there, and let's see what we can do with it next. I feel like I'm inclined to create a band that gathers the fullness in, and even though the intention of this swing top was to be a high-low, meaning higher in the front, lower in the back, I don't think for my restyle that I want to keep that, so I'm going to make some changes to that here in just a moment. Before I do that, I'm going to add some length, and it's, instead of this time offsetting as an internal line, I'm going to actually offset the outline of the pattern itself. So that's a little bit different. Highlight the line, right click, offset pattern outline, and let's say we want to extend it 8 inches. It gives a few options for default corner, right angled corner, unified corner. That didn't do anything good there. So we're just going to go with the default. It's good to experiment so you can get a visual on how things work. And then I need to do the same thing to the back now. It'll take that a moment. There we go. And you can see it automatically grew it in the 3D window. Now let's go over to the back. Same thing. You can guess what we do. Highlight it, right click while the mouse is on it, the cursor is on it. We are going to offset the pattern outline. It remembers that 8 inches, and we're going to click OK. And let's go ahead and simulate. And we see it did what we asked it. It's kind of an interesting swing tint right now, but we see that it's unsewn at the sides and it's unsewn at the back. So let's go ahead and fix that now. And to fix that, we're going to use our stitch editing tool, but I feel like I do not need these construction points, these control points. So I'm going to delete those so that I can have a continuous piece here. And let's see what we have. So we see the stitching of the side seams goes up to here. Let's see what happens if we're going to add a segment stitch. Now you can see that it's going to overlap because there's actually a little notch or control point there. So to avoid having an accidental overlapping mess, I'm going to go ahead and use my edit tool, and I'm going to get rid of this stitching and just start with my free sewing. I'm starting over, free sewing, start from here and here, and corresponding start and stop. Let's go see the result of that. You can see the stitching lines here. If you didn't see your stitching lines for some reason, you would go to your garment display and turn on show threads. Sometimes I like looking at them, sometimes I don't. It just depends on what's going on. So we fix that, and we need to do the same for the back. And let's go over here, stitch editing here, and we can see that it just has from here to here, this section. However, I think instead of redoing it, I'm just going to simply extend each side. They match up, and of course we know what's going to happen. It's going to update over here in the 3D window. Alright, the next thing that I am going to do is I want to lower this front hike a little bit, both for the bodice and the bottom. So I'm going to do that next. Just checking that real quick. And of course I'm turning off simulation anytime that I don't need it because it slows down the computer. Alright, so over to the cleanup. I'm going to go ahead now and get rid of my archived patterns and get rid of that quick and sloppy skirt that I had for modesty. And now let's go over here and address that issue that I wanted. I am going to go ahead and do my splits. I'm going to select my, we need to go over here and unlock all internal lines because I couldn't access that. So right click, we're going to cut and sew. Over here, right click, cut and sew. They're symmetrical. Now I have separate pieces with a seam, although it looks like there's a problem in the back. For whatever reason, maybe I accidentally hit cut instead of cut and sew. Surely it cannot be a bug, but that happens. So I just did segment stitch from one to the other. It's looking kind of like a baby doll dress here. Alright, so we know that I want this bodice to come down a little bit. And maybe I just need to only drop the bodice since this is pretty parallel, this bottom part here. So let's work on this bodice. Now you can see that we have, when I hit the shortcut C, the curve tool, the V, you can see that there are a lot of curved segment points. So once that's turned on, I can drag all around these and delete them. But then I'm just going to get a snapped straight line, and I feel like I still want a visual of how it was originally. To do that, And when you see my cursor change, I'm usually just hitting the Z shortcut, which is the Edit Pattern tool. A, of course, is to select a whole pattern piece. So I am going to select this whole pattern piece. I'm going to right click and I'm going to clone as a reference line. Now there is a marked line all the way around it that will stay even if I make edits to the pattern, which in this case is going to be all those curved points there. So now you can still see that I have that reference line. So now I am going to drop this down, and I'm going to use my arrows on my keyboard because I have them set to move 1/8 of an inch each time. So I know if I move it 4 times, it's 1/2 an inch. If I move it 4 more times, I know that I've gone down another inch. Now I know this is not curved and pretty yet. I'm just simulating to see if I've dropped as much as I would like to, just in the center front. Not quite there yet. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go another 1/2 inch. And let's keep on going. Of course, we know that we need all of this because of the fullness of the bust. And just a little bit more. Okay, I think dropped wise, we still have a little bit of a high-low, but I can live with that. And now I'm going to hit my V tool to go ahead and bring some curves in here. I think that's all I need actually. Let's hit simulate. And now you can see that that did a really good job of dropping this and making it semi-even, which is what I was going for. Now for some reason in the back I must have moved or bumped something here. I can see that my neckline area and my back no longer match up, but let's not fret. Let's use this as an opportunity to see what's up with that, because it really did happen. Alright, so this is the back. This gives us an opportunity to take a look at the walk tool to see if this and this matched. I must have bumped something somewhere, I don't know. But we can also use the edit sewing tool, and now that I've clicked on it, you can see that it is showing up that this seam goes to this seam as a relationship, and both of those are 13.162. So I see what happened here. So something probably did get bumped, because you can see that there's a section here that is unsewn and they no longer match up. So there's a couple of nope. Let's take a closer look. Things are not always what they seem. So you can see that it's actually overlapping. Somehow it got shifted here to where it's actually going into the sleeve opening here. So it would all add up if we fix it. So everything is fine with the sleeve part, and what I'm editing is here. So I'm tapping on this and I'm bringing it up here, and I'm going to crawl over here to the top of the neck and fix that. And if we zoom out, we can see 13.162, and this stops and starts where it should. This stops and starts where it should as well. So now we know what to predict. When I hit simulate, it's going to fix that problem. I would have to really review this video to see if I could see where I accidentally caused that shift to happen, but it is clearly there. Alright, next on the cleanup, I'm going to get rid of that facing line, because for this exercise we're not worried about the facing right now. Keeping things neat and tidy, I'm going to keep this band and sleeve nearby each other. Alright, so my next goal is I want to create a band sliced right here in the middle that is smaller than the fullness of both parts, and this smaller band could represent a structured band, it could represent an elastic band, an elastic casing, whatever we end up doing as something that draws this in. Now, if I don't want to go through all of that with putting in a waistband, I know the waistband is going to be, or the band, I know it's going to be more streamlined for what I can see in my imagination. But if I just quickly wanted to audition the idea of what it would be like to gather this right here, whether I have a seam or not, it doesn't matter. But it does matter that I do have a seam in this instance, because now I have some contoured shaping for the upper front bodice, but it doesn't matter that I have a seam for the back because it's just a stylized seam. There's no contouring or difference between these two here in the back. But back to the elasticity. Of course, anything that we highlight, we would get access to the property editor. If we select a whole pattern piece, property editor would relate to that whole pattern piece. If we're just selecting lines, property editor relates to just those lines. So in this instance, I've selected these lines, and now in property editor I can go to elastic and turn that on, and I am going to, we'll just leave it at 80 and see what happens. And now see, I've simulated, and that kind of has gathered that up a little bit. I can increase it more by selecting them again and coming over here and saying, hey, I wonder what happens if I do a 70% ratio. And then I go and it gathers it up. So just based on what I'm seeing right now, I can imagine that, yeah, I do think I'd want it to gather into a band and continue more restyling ideas with that. So with that, I could either come over here and turn the elastic off, which is a perfectly good option, but I can also go to my history panel and see where did I first elect to engage the elastic, and I can go and restore a point before all that happened. And so that's what I did. Now let's go to creating that band that I want, and let's say that I want let's say a 50% ratio, and let's kind of visualize why we would do that. Her waist is probably not more than 28-30 inches, and right now the whole front, if I select one of these and come over here to 2D line length and symmetrical line length, I'll see that just one side, just this one front, is 33 inches. So we've got about a 60-inch circumference here. So I could certainly go 50%, which would mean, let's say I want to do a little less than 50% or a little more than 50%. I'm just going to go with 16, half of 16, and let's make that 8. And I'm just going to make it easy and do the same for each one. So now I'm going to use my Create Pattern tool, rectangle, tap on an empty part of the screen. I want it to be the 8 inches wide that we talked about, and let's say we want it to be 1 inch. And it's going to give me what I asked for. And I'm in simulation mode right now, so that was moving a little bit slow. So now that it's turned off, things should move a little faster. And you can see that it popped up in the same position as where I had it in here in the 2D window. I'm going to Control C to copy, Control D to mirror paste, and now I have my second one here. And I want to do the same thing for the back. I can, since I don't have things sewn together, I can do the same thing for the back by just doing Control C. Now I'm just going to do Control V at this point and bring these over to the back. However, there's no back side of this flat avatar orientation, so I'm going to have to select these And they are in the location of the screen, but that doesn't help me as far as bringing it to the avatar. I could use arrangement points. We'll get to that at some point. But for now, I think as long as I'm using my gizmo to get in the ballpark, I'll be just fine. Alright, so we have these front and back, and just to make sure that I don't have the back side, I'm going to just use textured surface. So we can see the right side of my fabric is facing out correctly in both instances. So now let's split and sew these together. And we do not need the stitching any longer for the front and back. Instead, we're going to stitch this tiny little band to all of that fullness in the front and in the back. You can see that's attached there. Same thing for the back. And so you can see all of that happening. Now, I could just grab this so that you can see what's going on here. I'm not simulated. I'm not in simulation mode. There we go. And we know what'll happen when we simulate. All of that is going to snap together. So now we have quite a different look. We have a little bit of cleanup to do, and it's a little rough. We've got some chunky gathers there, but we can fix that in a moment. I'm going to close up this little center front hole. I can merge these two, or I can stitch them together. I'm going to go ahead and merge them because I'm still going to retain my symmetry. You can see the dashed center line there. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to keep the back open just in case I decide to do a back zipper or something. But we do need to sew the side seams together, so segment tool, stitch from here, stitch from there. And simulate. So that is complete. And let's say I want to see some contrast action. I just so happen to have another fabric color here, so I'm going to drag and drop there. And now a few tips. Now, all of the fullness of this fabric being sewn into this band is causing some bulk and rippling, which you would get in real life as well. So we would need to either have some fusing or stabilizer, or have done a stay stitch, something to give that some security there, some stability. So in this instance, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit. I'm going to use the elastic tool to reinforce the edge of the band back to 100% of what it should be. Let's see how much it's stretched out as it is right now. What I enjoy is that I can select a line, which I know is 8 inches. And I can come over here to my property editor and see, yes, my 2D pattern, it is 8 inches. However, the 3D line length is, for this just one segment, is 9 1/3. So it's stretched out about 1.4 inches, which is not what I want to have represented for the final garment. So this is where I'm going to use the elasticity tool to say, no, I know in real life I'm going to make this stable and remain its 8 inches, or at least pretty close to it, and I want my simulated garment to do the same thing. So that's where, even though I may not be putting elastic in the real garment, I'm just using this to say I want this elasticity to bring this to a 100% ratio, meaning no stretching out and no gathering either, just so I get a true representation. And now let's simulate, and you can see that snapped that into place there. So now I'm getting exactly what I expect. Now there is a way to make these gathers finer and not so chunky, and that is with the shearing tool. However, it does add some strain onto all of the things that have to be processed, which means it slows down the workflow. It is taxing on your computer, so I'm not going to do that until the very end. So now I'm just here thinking. I did change up the style a little bit, and I'm happy about that. And now I want to consider, what else can I do for this restyling? Let's say I might want to put in a style line and have that be in a contrast, kind of maybe through here and at the sides. Let's experiment with that, and that would be drawing a style line. And I'm just going to eyeball it. Something like here, I can kind of see that, something here. So I'm just kind of memorizing it at the moment, and I'm going to draw in an internal line, and that's internal polygon line here. And I'm just doing from one end to the other right now. That's looking pretty good. We know I have a sharp line right here that we probably do not want. So in that instance, I'm going to use my smooth curve tool, grab this, and you can see that it's just going to smooth that out, either precisely if I want it to do it an exact amount, or if I'm just eyeballing it to see what's comfortable for me. So see, we immediately got that there, and if I wanted to, I could cut and sew this. That style line could be enhanced by some contrast top stitching, and we may decide we don't need it in the back, it's just for an interesting style line in the front. Maybe it would have it in the center as well. So how would we make sure that the seam continues onto the skirt? That's pretty easy. We know that this is 4.552. Let's do an X, right click, and we see line 1, which is this yellow, 4.552, and we're going to click OK. We have that control point there. And now we're just going to draw an internal line, snap on that, do something that feels kind of natural. Thinks I'm still trying to draw another line there. Right click, cut and sew. Ah, very interesting. Oh wait, no it did. I thought for a moment that it did not add that symmetrically because I don't have my halo around this, and that's only because of the fact that this blue halo in the front, or this blue highlight here and the dashed line, shows me that I have the symmetrical lines. Alright, so we're similar to what we started with, but we are different. Just for fun, we can drag the contrast here and here. And now let's say I want to add a ruffle to the bottom. We experienced doing a smaller band here, but now let's say I want to do a ruffle. And we're in segmented pieces as well, so this will be a good way to show you sewing one piece to multiple pieces automatically. Alright, let's say I want to do the ruffle 2 to 1. 2 inches for every 1 inch, and that is 22.23 inches times 2, which is 44. And I'll tell you, taking a 44-inch piece and sewing it to the bottom of this can be a little bit exhaustive. So instead, I'm going to start out with my ruffle being the same length as this is, and then after it's sewn, then I'm going to increase the size, but by using the M to N sewing, it will automatically readjust it. I'll show you what I mean. So let's say we're going to do a 4-inch ruffle. I know that, oops, I need my Z tool. I know that these bottom edges, so let's say 25 inches to make it easy. We're going to draw a rectangle that's 25 wide and 4 inches tall. And we're going to say OK. Now I'm going to bring this over here and I'm going to sew it to the bottom. And this is where the M to N tool is. I don't want to, in a fiddly way, figure out where to stop and start the sewing here and here, and then here and here instead, which I could do with the free sewing, but there's an easier way. That's this M to N. I'm sewing one or more edges to another set of one or more edges. So we're going to start the first part. Click on a pointer segment to begin the free M sewing. So here to here and here to here, and hit enter. So I'm telling it we're going to take this here and we're going to sew it from here, and you can see it's calculating on its own. Now if it is the totality of these two here, it would stop where this little blue magnetic dot is, but we know that we're going to be increasing, so we're just going to go all the way. Increasing, we know, meaning that we know that our ruffle is going to be bigger anyway. Now you do see some crisscrossies here, but that is not because we accidentally overlapped any sewing or that there was a bug. It's just that since we have this curly Q here going on, it's doing that visually, that visual crisscross. So now let's hit the space bar, which is our simulation, and watch it go there. Now here's the fun part. When I do this and I do the other side mirrored, Control C, Control D, it already has the sewing relationships that are packed along with it. It'll be a little bit different for the back. And I'm not going to merge these yet. I'm just going to stitch them together because we know that fabric only comes so wide. So we could do a continuously super long ruffle on the cross grain, but if we were to cut it on grain, we'd have to have some seams hidden and all that. Alright, so I had this front piece in a couple of different sections, so let's see what happens when we cut and paste to the back. Control C, we're not mirror pasting, we're just doing a direct copy. So let's see what we have here. Okay, so there's no sewing, but it did keep the kind of curly Q shape. So I'm just going to turn that around and pop it through to the back. And sewing this side will be much easier. I can just use the segment here and simulate. Simulate. Just kind of give it a little tug. And the other style line is just kind of hidden in these gathers here, but it is there. Alright, let's give her a little bit of contrast in her ruffle there. Alright, so now we have this stitched on. We can sew the sides. And now I'm going to increase the width of this so that, since it's already sewn there, I'm going to use my A select pattern tool, and I'm just going to drag it out what looks to be about half the width of it again. I don't want to go too crazy, so that I can keep things stable. And now I'm going to drag it out again. Or I could make this an exact width, but I'm just eyeballing it. And now we have a nice full ruffle there. So let's explore if we can make this an exact length that we want, how we would do that. So let's say we wanted the exact length to be about, let's say we wanted it to be 44.5 inches. So I'm going to use the A Select Pattern tool, and I'm going to grab this, right click, and over here for width, I can say I want it to be exactly 44.5 inches, and say OK. And I keep forgetting to turn off simulation, and that's why this takes longer than it should. But here we go. And now to do the same thing to this, I don't know if I want to drag it all out all at once because it might get a little crazy with collision. So I just want to do it in a couple of steps. And now I can do that thing again to where I can say, hey, I want you to be exactly 44.5 inches, and click OK, hit simulate, and we have that there. All right, I think that is enough restyling for now. I think logistically the way that this would work and function is we would have this be an elasticized band in the contrast fabric. This does not need to be elasticized. We would need to make sure that the opening is big enough to go over the head. So it will go over the body just fine with the elasticized band, but the head needs to be at least about 23 inches, and I know that it's not. I think it's closer to about 21 from the last time I measured it. So the solution would be to allow a keyhole opening at the center back. Let's say we're going to do the center back seam, and it could have a little button there. And then we can do the contrast stitching on all of the seams to make those style lines pop. And now the last thing actually that I'll show you, since I'm not going to be doing any more edits, is that shirring tool, so that you can see how it really makes a much nicer refinement. Now, I do not need any shirring to the base of the skirt here. I actually need it to be strengthened a little bit. Now I did already, I can see I added seam taping there to help it, to give it a little bit of strength. I did that previously, but it's still not enough to prevent all of this waviness here. So if you remember what I did previously, I selected those lines, turned on elastic, and said we just want that to be 100%, neither stretched nor gathered. And then for the ruffling, the shirring, we want to use the shirring tool. Now that will kind of reduce the particle distance in that area, make it a finer mesh, so to speak, and that does create some processes that, oops, I don't want to do shirring on this, I just want to do shirring at the bodice, the waist of the skirt, and the upper edges of the ruffles. And then that's where we're going to turn on shirring. And you can see we get these blue little wiggles here to give us an indication that we have that shirring. Now we hit our spacebar to simulate, and you see that gave it a much prettier, a nicer refined look right there. And I'm going to turn on the mesh view. Mesh, 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 mesh. Where did mesh go? Oh, show wireframe. Now these are the vertices, the little particle points here, so we can see there's not a lot of information or particles in where I had the original distances, but where I did the shirring, there are more particles closer together, which gives it a finer, if you give it in your mind, give it a finer resolution. You can see that from the mesh, and you can see that I did shirring here as well. Alright, I think that wraps it up. I would encourage you to try these different techniques. You can start out with a simple t-shirt pattern, and you can do the same slash, insert a waistband, play around with shirring, play around with gathers, and all of the different tools that we experimented with here. Happy CLO learning!